Tell us, as you start off tonight, how it impacted you when you read the stories of Unborn, Untold.
The story, the book was just, it was a real welcome surprise. And I just read story after story. And I think just what I loved about it was how personal it was, how real it was, and how confident I was in the story in the book that said, this is a incredibly important subject, and it is such a tough thing to talk about and work with, but these stories need to be get out, and this is just something, and it's done in a way, and it's a package that you actually feel proud of giving out and handing out and endorsing and letting people know.
So tonight, we're so excited that you can help us a little bit with your thoughts of how the church can impact the community and make a difference, because we all know that there's a lot of pain in the pews of our church. And sometimes people don't feel like their pains are addressed. So,
well, I think that's a fantastic question. And I think one of the best ways to do it is through stories and books and the people like Unborn, Untold. Those are 17 people who were brave enough and courageous enough to share their stories. And we know for every one of those stories that are told, there are countless other ones that are being withheld. There are people silently suffering in our pews. And so when you expose stories, when people have the courage to share, then it allows other people, if they're carrying a burden, especially with abortion or whatever they're wrestling through, it gives them, oh, I'm not in this alone. And you could just realize the pain and the burden and how long she had been holding on and how she still didn't want anybody else to know, and could she trust. You realize how important that is. You don't guess these things. You don't know what stories people are bringing, what heartache they are bringing, what they are carrying with them. But when folks have the opportunity to share, then it allows the other people to say, okay, this is a place that actually cares. And I think that's one of the first things that we need to do, is to be willing to share, have people share their stories.
So now that you've heard the stories, now that you've met some of the people involved with these stories, what practical things can a church do to be ready to help those that might find themselves in an unwanted pregnancy?
There's a number of things. One I'm going to just start really, really simply and talk about on a more pastoral level, more theological level to start, and more than practical. But the one is just, churches have to be both pastoral and then prophetic. And what I mean by that is, so many people are afraid, whether either coming through the doors of a church, whether even if they are part of the church, sort of exposing those hidden parts of their lives. And one of the Christianity 101 and probably Doctrine 101 is original sin. For all have fallen short, and all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's the one thing all Christians can hold in common. So the last thing a sinner should feel unwelcome would be in a church. And so one of the things that we need to do is be able to love people, wrap their arms around them with the forgiveness and grace of God and what's found in Jesus Christ. So that is one thing. So people know when they're carrying these burden, there is a place that they can come to, and that they are surrounded by the love and forgiveness and grace of Jesus. So I think that's a huge pastoral. And then as the church just helps walking through these people through healing and whatever they need going forward. The other prophetic end, which is somewhat, usually churches are either too pastoral or too prophetic, and it's hard to have a balance. I'm far more probably pastoral than prophetic, but the prophetic is still being that voice of consciousness to the church, to the culture around us, to be able to boldly speak against some of the things that are some of the things we would rather not speak about, and still being very real that sin is sin, and real damage is done, and we can't hide things under the carpet. So there still needs to be a boldness. There needs to be that love, but there is still need for that boldness to preach what is good and true and what is right and what God desires for his church and for the world around it. The other thing that I would say on a more practical level, can't just say this is what we're for or this is what we are against if we're not really willing to put our money where our mouths are. If we are not really willing to get our hands dirty. Are we willing to open up our houses? Are we willing to write those checks? Are we willing to provide daycare, whatever that is needed? And to do one without the other, it's going back to James chapter 2. Faith without works is dead.
Now, let's just talk about a little bit before we move on about the education of sexuality and the beautiful picture of the covenant relationship of marriage and the intimacy that comes from a covenant relationship under God's perspective. What part does the church have to play, or does it have a part to play, in educating our young people?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In one sense, the church is far more silenced in this area than it has in the past. Our reach is definitely smaller, and we really are, and not even, the church has moved so far away from its traditional foundational biblical teachings on sexuality in so many ways, especially in many of our churches in Canada. But we should never apologize for who we are and what we've believed, and it still needs to be foundation. We need to be the ones going the wrong way against the stream on this, and do so boldly, and not have to apologize for teaching, for preaching the beauty of biblical sexuality in marriage. So I think that is one thing. I think a lot of times the church, especially now, is shying away from it. Where I would say it is difficult, and I think this is where the church has to realize there are limits. You have to understand it really is an uphill battle. For most people, when they do go to church, they're only in church for an hour, 2 hours on a Sunday morning. There might be some midweek Bible study, youth program, but you've got maybe an hour to 2 hours tops. Meanwhile, if they go to school, if they're on their televisions or on their social media, their phones, their tablets, they're getting indoctrinated 10 times more in a secular worldview, especially when it comes to sexuality, than they would from a church. And just the exposure, the church's exposure, is going to be very, very small in comparison to what else they are. So one of the biggest issues that the church can do is not try to take the whole role and responsibility on it, but is really to encourage and resource and help parents. Parents are ultimately going to be the ones that have to be the best teachers.
So as we're just closing off this, Pastor Jeff, would you just speak briefly to pastors?
I would say to pastors, for any pastors who are listening or need encouragement, just get past the fear. I think that is the first thing. Many times, so much, and I'm just as guilty as anybody, is by nature, especially when you have a board that you're accountable to and you want people to come back and like you every week, is there are certain things that you would rather not have to deal with or have to deal quietly on the side. Many pastors want to deal with hard issues, but there is a fear. And God's, I love what Paul says, I did not give you a spirit of timidity. And I don't think we as pastors and as churches should worry about being too timid. The other thing, and I'm going to say thank you to Ruth, this is something that I have been wanting to address in in church for years. And one of the struggles was, how do you do it? And sometimes you are conscious as a gentleman, not as a woman, will I be able to understand and speak to this in the same way that a woman can? And how will people hear it? So one of the things that was so encouraging about Unborn, Untold was this created a natural place and a natural conversation to bring it up. And it was done with the right people who actually knew what they were talking about and could do so with authority and a sensitivity. And I thank you for that. And I think that's a good place. If you're uncomfortable, pastors, and you do have that fear because you're like, I'm not sure if I'm the right person, then find the right person or people who can come alongside and help you do it and create that, opening that door for you.
So thank you so much, Pastor Jeff. It's been a pleasure to have you on each time, and you've been a great blessing to the movement, to the Unborn, Untold movement.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you for all your work and all that you're doing as well.
God bless.